In northern Mexico, there was once a grassland that had almost vanished from the map of life. For more than 100 years, this place no longer looked like a fertile prairie. The ground had dried into a hard crust, cracked under the sun, while native grasses slowly disappeared, replaced by thorny plants, dense shrubs, and useless weeds. What once made this land alive was the bison, a massive animal that had roamed the plains of North America for thousands of years. They could weigh nearly a ton, possessed incredible endurance, and once numbered in the tens of millions. When great herds of bison moved across the plains, the earth trembled beneath their hooves, and the entire ecosystem seemed to follow their rhythm. But then humans pushed them to the edge of disappearance. From around 60 million individuals, bison were hunted down until only a few hundred remained. When they vanished, the grasslands also lost the animal that had quietly kept the soil, the plants, and countless other species in balance. And yet, after more than a century of decline, only 23 bison were brought back to Mexico. The unbelievable question is, how could such a small group make a land that seemed dead begin to come back to life? Before they nearly disappeared, bison were once the living force of the North American grasslands. In the 19th century, around 60 million bison roamed across the vast plains. When a massive herd moved, the sound of thousands of hooves could travel for miles, making the ground shake as if a storm were sweeping across the prairie. But the importance of bison was not only in their enormous numbers. They were a key part of how the grasslands worked. Every step disturbed the surface of the soil, opening space for rainwater to sink in. The trails they carved could guide water through dry land, while the places where they rested became small pockets of nutrients and new life. For many native nations, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, bisons were not just wild animals. They provided meat to survive the winter, hides for shelters and clothing, and bones for making tools. In their spiritual life, bison also stood as a symbol of survival, gratitude, and the deep bond between people and the land. If you saw an animal so important that it could feed entire communities and help keep a whole grassland in balance, yet still be hunted to the edge of extinction, what would you think? Do humans have the right to erase a species for war and profit? I really want to know your answer, so leave a comment below and tell me what you think. The tragedy began in the mid-19th century, when conflicts between the U.S. military and native tribes grew more violent. People realized that to weaken the nations living on the grasslands, they only had to destroy their most important source of survival. And that source was the bison. General Philip Sheridan supported the bison hunters because they could accomplish something the army would have struggled to do on its own. Once the bison were wiped out, tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho lost their meat, hides, tools, shelters, and the very foundation of their survival. From there, the hunt turned into a ruthless campaign. Hunters shot bison for their hides, while the bodies were often left to rot across the plains. When the Transcontinental Railroad appeared, shipping bisons east became even easier, and the speed of the slaughter became terrifying. Some shooters killed hundreds of animals in a single day. Buffalo Bill once bragged that he had killed more than 4,000 bison in just 18 months. From around 60 million individuals, bison fell to only a few hundred by the end of the 19th century. In northern Mexico, the wild herds also disappeared, leaving behind a dry and silent land. When bison disappeared, the disaster did not stop with a single species. The entire grassland began to lose its natural rhythm. Without herds of bison constantly grazing and moving, the grass grew taller and thicker, making it harder for prairie dogs to spot predators. Their underground cities slowly shrank, and much of the territory that once belonged to them disappeared. That decline pulled other species down with it. Black-footed ferrets depended almost entirely on prairie dogs for food, so when their prey vanished, they also fell into crisis. Burrowing owls lost their shelter as well because they often nested inside the abandoned burrows of prairie dogs. Below the surface, things became even worse. Without bison hooves breaking through the hardened ground, the prairie surface slowly sealed into a dry crust. Rain fell, but it could no longer soak into the soil. Instead, it ran across the surface and carried away the thin, fertile layer. Thorny plants, shrubs, and useless weeds began to spread. A land that had once been full of life slowly turned into a dry, silent place that seemed almost unable to recover on its own. In 2009, an unexpected turning point arrived. 23 purebred bison from the Wind Cave herd in South Dakota were brought to the Llanos Biosphere Reserve in the Mexican state of Chihuahua. These animals were not chosen at random because their genes carried the original bison bloodline, without mixture from domestic cattle. Llanos had once been a place where millions of bison passed through, but after more than a century without them, the land had become scorched, hardened, and ecologically exhausted. Many people doubted that 23 animals so small compared to such a vast landscape could make any real difference. But time proved the opposite. By 2018, the herd had grown to around 200 bison. More importantly, the ground began to soften, young grasses appeared, rainwater soaked in more easily, and the dead land slowly began to wake up. Bison did not bring the land back through magic, but through the way they lived every day. As they kept moving across the prairie, their heavy hooves broke through the hardened soil, allowing air and rainwater to sink deeper into the ground. Their dung returned nutrients to the earth, while seeds stuck to their fur and later fell across the grassland. From the first small patches of green, plants slowly began to return. As vegetation recovered, prairie dogs found places to live again. Then burrowing owls and black-footed ferrets also had a chance to come back. Just 23 bisons had started a chain reaction, turning a land that seemed dead into a place where life could begin again. If you found this story interesting, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.